It was a bitter January morning in Alberta, 2021. The kind of cold that burns your lungs when you breathe, where the silence hangs heavier than the snow itself. A man named Jack Ellison, a local truck driver, was making his usual route down County Road 12, a road he'd driven 100 times before. But that morning, something felt different. The air felt off. It was too still, too quiet. Jack had lived in Alberta his whole life, 47 years of frozen winters, local diners, and Friday night football. He was a practical man, a meet empathatos kind of guy, not someone who believed in strange stories or got carried away by his imagination. He dealt in what was real, what was right in front of him. Yet, that day, as he rounded the corner near Cedarwood Lane, his headlights caught something that made him stop cold. There, in the middle of the road, stood a single shoe. It was a small, white sneaker, dusted with a delicate layer of frost. Its laces were untied, as if it had been dropped or kicked off mid-step. Jack slowed his rig, confusion clouding his thoughts. Who loses a shoe in the middle of nowhere on a morning this cold? Then, his eyes caught a flash of color against the bleak, white landscape. Tangled on the roadside fence was a red scarf. He knew that scarf. In a town this small, everyone did. It belonged to Emily Turner, the 24-year-old who had vanished without a trace 2 nights earlier after leaving her waitressing job at the town diner. The disappearance had sent a shockwave through the tight-knit community. The police had launched a massive search effort, deploying drones, search dogs, and dozens of volunteers. They combed every field, every patch of woods, every abandoned building. They found nothing. Emily's family had made a heart-wrenching plea on the local news. Her mother, face pale and voice trembling, insisted Emily never walked home alone. She would have called someone. Someone always gave her a ride. The whole town watched, their hearts breaking for a family living through every parent's worst nightmare. The days passed, and a grim sense of hopelessness began to settle in. But now, here was Jack Ellison, a truck driver on his routine route, who had just stumbled onto something no one else had found. He pulled his truck over to the shoulder. The engines rumbled, the only sound in the frozen world. His heart was pounding, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The truck's headlights cut through the swirling morning fog, illuminating the eerie scene. He swung the cab door open and stepped out. His breath turned to white clouds in the frigid air. He walked towards the shoe, his boots crunching on the icy gravel. He then looked towards the fence, confirming it was indeed Emily's scarf. A cold dread, far colder than the air, began to seep into his bones. His gaze fell to the snow-covered ground beside the road. He saw it a single footprint, then another, leading away from the road and towards the ditch. The footprints were small, feminine, and appeared hurried. He followed the trail, one step at a time, until they simply stopped. It was as if the person who made them had vanished into thin air. That's when he saw it. A faint glint of metal, half buried under a patch of ice and snow, just beyond the edge of the ditch. His curiosity overpowering his fear, Jack knelt down. He brushed away the snow with his gloved hand and froze. It was a cell phone. Emily's cell phone. The case was one she had proudly shown off at the diner, a custom design with a sunflower on it, and it was still on. The screen was dark, but a small indicator light blinked rhythmically. Jack knew he shouldn't touch it. This was a crime scene. He immediately called 911, his voice shaky as he explained what he'd found. When the investigators arrived, they carefully collected the shoe, the scarf, and the phone, treating each item with the utmost care. The phone was a potential goldmine of information, a digital breadcrumb trail that could lead them straight to what happened to Emily. At the station, the forensic team got to work. They discovered the phone had been recording a video. As they prepared to play it, a tense silence filled the room. They had no idea what they were about to witness. Could it be the key to finding Emily? Or would it reveal a truth far more disturbing than anyone could imagine? What that video captured, no one in Alberta was ready to hear. It wasn't a recording of a random attack or a tragic accident. The truth, when it finally spilled out from that tiny screen, shattered everything this quiet, unassuming town thought it knew about itself. It turned friend against friend, neighbor against neighbor, because someone Emily knew, someone she trusted, had been there with her that night. The video revealed a conversation A friendly chat that slowly, chillingly, turned sinister. And in those final, terrifying moments, it became clear that the cold wasn't the only thing that froze in Alberta. The betrayal ran far deeper. The investigation that followed would uncover a web of secrets and lies hidden just beneath the surface of their peaceful community. The case of the missing waitress became a story about the darkness that can exist in the most unexpected places. It served as a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats aren't strangers in the dark, but the people we think we know best. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Stay safe out there. Before the news broke, before Emily Turner's name became a headline, Alberta was the kind of place people forgot about, tucked between frozen fields and endless pine trees. Population just under 4,000, one main street, one diner, one gas station. People here didn't lock their doors because everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. Emily grew up on Cedarwood Lane, in a white two-story house her father built with his own hands. She was the kind of girl people noticed, not because she tried to be, but because she carried warmth wherever she went. She worked part-time at Millie's Diner, always wore that red scarf in winter, and had dreams of studying art in Chicago. Her mother, Linda Turner, was a school teacher. Her father, Mark, a mechanic at the local auto shop. Together, they represented everything Alberta valued: family, faith, and familiarity. The Turners were the kind of folks who brought pies to new neighbors and showed up to every town fair. That's what made her disappearance hit harder. It wasn't just another crime. It was a betrayal of trust, a fracture in the illusion of safety. That winter had already been cruel. Temperatures dipped to -30, and the snow piled so high the people joked the town would vanish under it. But behind that, quiet. Something darker was brewing. Whispers that someone in Alberta wasn't who they appeared to be. The night Emily disappeared, she'd worked a double shift at the diner. Surveillance showed her leaving just after 9:47 p.m. She waved goodbye to Millie, wrapped her red scarf, and walked toward the parking lot. The cameras caught her car, headlights turning on, then suddenly shutting off. After that, nothing. For 2 days, the town searched through woods, frozen fields and ditches, buried in snow. But as hours turned into days, hope turned into fear. People started locking their doors. Parents kept their kids inside. It was as if the warmth had drained out of Alberta itself. And then came the rumors. Some said Emily ran away. Others whispered about her ex-boyfriend, a local volunteer firefighter named Ryan Hawley. He'd been seen near the diner that night, sitting in his truck with the engine running. Ryan told police he went there to talk, but she never showed. Still, something didn't sit right. There were inconsistencies, missing minutes, calls that didn't add up. And when detectives found her phone, the same one Jack Ellison discovered half buried in the snow, they realized this wasn't just a disappearance. It was a story carefully buried under layers of ice, waiting to thaw. And as the truth began to surface, it would tear through the calm facade of Alberta like a winter storm. Because in this town, the danger wasn't hiding in the woods. It was sitting right across the street. Asterisk, before Emily Turner became the center of a mystery, her life was beautifully ordinary. The kind of life that makes a story like hers so haunting. Cedarwood Lane was the picture of small town calm. Kids rode bikes down the slushy street. Mailboxes leaned slightly from years of frost, and the scent of pine drifted through the air every morning. The Turners' home stood near the edge of the woods, where the sunrise caught their windows in gold light every day. Emily loved that house. Her bedroom walls were covered with sketches, faces, landscapes, and little notes she wrote to herself. Keep going. The world's bigger than Alberta. She dreamed of moving to Chicago for art school, maybe opening a gallery one day. But she stayed for her family, working shifts at Millie's Diner to save money. Everyone in town knew her. The girl with the red scarf and the easy laugh. Most of Benning. After her shift, she'd sit by the counter with a cup of cocoa and talk to Officer Paul Briggs, a regular customer who always ordered the same thing: black coffee, 2 sugars. "You'll make it out of here someday," he used to tell her. Emily would smile and reply, "I'll miss it when I do." Her best friend, Chloe Watson, described her as the glue of their group, the one who remembered birthdays, sent late-night texts, and never let anyone feel forgotten. On the night before she disappeared, Emily and Chloe had plans to watch a movie. Emily canceled last minute, saying she had to meet someone. Chloe didn't ask who. In a town like Alberta, secrets were rare. But when they existed, they burned quietly. Life on Cedarwood Lane moved in slow rhythms. Sunday church bells, the crunch of tires on frozen gravel, laughter spilling from the diner at lunch rush. Yet behind the calm, cracks had begun to form. People whispered about a stranger seen wandering near the woods. A dark SUV parked too long outside the diner. Missing. Pets. Small things no one connected, until Emily vanished. That Friday morning, her mother made breakfast as usual. Eggs, toast, and coffee. Emily was supposed to stop by before her shift, but never did. When Linda called her phone, it went straight to voicemail. By sunset, panic had set in. Her father searched the road. Chloe drove to the diner. Officer Briggs filed a missing person report before midnight. The town gathered that weekend to search, trudging through snow with flashlights and hope. But hope fades fast in the cold. Each day without news made it harder to breathe, harder to believe. Cedarwood Lane became quiet again, but not the comforting kind. The kind that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. And somewhere out there, in that endless white, Emily Turner was gone. Her footprints stopped at the tree line. And Wheatham, the sense of safety Alberta once had. Nobody knew it then, but the story of her life, and what happened to her, would expose secrets that had been buried for years. Because before the vanishing, everything seemed normal. That's what makes it so terrifying. Asterisk, January 14th, 2021. The night Alberta lost its innocence. The temperature had dropped to 20 below, and a thin fog rolled across Cedarwood Lane, swallowing sound and light. It was the kind of night where everything felt suspended, like time itself didn't want to move forward. Emily's shift at Millie's diner ended late. Business had been slow, the roads were slick, and most people were home by sunset. She'd stayed behind to help Millie close up, wiping down tables and humming along to the radio. At 9:47 p.m., she grabbed her bag, wrapped her red scarf, and waved goodbye. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The parking lot behind the diner was dimly lit, one flickering bulb. Snow piled against the dumpsters. Emily's small silver Honda sat near the edge. Surveillance footage showed her unlocking the door, setting her bag inside, and then pausing. She turned her head, as if someone had called her name. Then she stepped out of frame. 30 seconds later, her car lights flickered off. Police later discovered the driver's seat was pushed back farther than Emily's height allowed, and the passenger door was slightly ajar. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no footprints leading away, just silence. That night, a snowstorm swept through Alberta, erasing everything: tracks, traces, time. By morning, it was as if she'd been swallowed whole by the cold dot at 7:32 a.m. Linda Turner called 911. She didn't come home, she said. She never does this. Something's wrong. Officers searched her route from the diner to Cedarwood Lane, but every road looked the same. White, empty, endless. Then came the first clue. A gas station clerk remembered seeing a young woman matching Emily's description around 10:15 p.m., standing by the payphone. She looked scared, the clerk said. She kept looking over her shoulder, like someone was following her. But before he could step outside, she was gone. For days, the town mobilized volunteers. Drones and dogs combed through frozen fields. Flyers covered every storefront. People left porch lights on, hoping she'd somehow find her way home. Still, no sign. Detectives dug into her phone records. The last call she made was to an unknown number that pinged from just outside town, near the old quarry, a place kids used to hang out before it was fenced off. When officers went to check, they found tire tracks in the snow and something half buried near the fence line. Emily's sketchbook, the last drawing inside. A face, half shaded, half erased. And then came Jack Ellison, the truck driver who found her phone 3 days later, frozen beneath a layer of ice, still recording. Investigators were stunned to find a two-minded video clip inside. The footage was grainy, dark, but Emily's voice was clear. "Please, stop. I didn't tell anyone." Then a man's voice, low, familiar. "You shouldn't have come here." Shuffle. A gasp. The sound of something falling, then static dot. When police released that detail to the public, the town fell silent. Everyone knew that voice, or at least thought they did. It was a kind of tone that could belong to anyone's neighbor, friend, or co-worker. Alberta wasn't a city full of strangers. It was a small town full of suspects. That night, when the video went viral across local news, fear spread faster than the storm outside. Doors stayed locked, curtains drawn. People whispered in grocery aisles, asking the same question: who would hurt Emily Turner? And somewhere in the middle of that panic, someone knew exactly what happened and was praying the snow would keep their secret buried. Because of the truth about that night wasn't just about one girl disappearing. It was about what she saw before she vanished, and who she trusted enough to follow into the dark. The morning after Emily Turner's disappearance, Alberta felt like it had been hit by more than snow. The town's heartbeat slowed. The usual chatter at the diner was replaced by worried whispers, the sound of shovels scraping driveways more urgent than ever. Police blocked off roads. Volunteers fanned out across fields and wooded areas, and families gathered in living rooms, glued to the news, hoping for a miracle. Detective Sarah Collins was put in charge of the case. She had solved cases before, but something about Emily's disappearance felt different. The air thick with secrets that the snow tried to hide. Collins started with the obvious. Friends, family, and co-workers. Everyone had seen her leave the diner. Everyone knew her habits. Yet, no one had a clear explanation for where she went that night. The first suspect was Ryan Hawley, Emily's ex-boyfriend. He'd been seen near the diner that night, sitting in his truck long after the last customer left. When questioned, Ryan said he'd waited to talk to Emily about a personal matter, but she never came. His story seemed plausible, yet his nervous glances and twitching hands suggested there was more. He passed a polygraph test, but detectives kept him in mind. Sometimes truth isn't so simple. Next, there was Emily's art teacher, Mr. Leonard. He had been mentoring her for years, pushing her toward her dream of Chicago. Some town gossip suggested he had grown too close, sending her messages that made her uncomfortable. But he had an alibi, a winter festival in a neighboring town. Still, Collins kept his name on the list. In small towns, past behavior often hides under a thin layer of normalcy. Volunteers led by Jack Ellison retraced Emily's route from the diner to Cedarwood Lane. The snow had covered tracks, but they found subtle disturbances in the frost footprints that didn't match Emily's shoe size. A crushed branch at the edge of the woods, a faint trail toward the old quarry. Every lead seemed promising, yet frustratingly incomplete. Meanwhile, Emily's phone, recovered by Jack, became a key piece of evidence. Investigators analyzed the video clip. The grainy footage showed her voice, fearful and pleading. But the person speaking to her was only partially visible, and the angle made it nearly impossible to identify him. Still, the recording sparked a wave of tips from the public, neighbors claiming they saw strange cars, people claiming to have heard screams the night she disappeared, and some insisting they saw a figure lurking near the diner. Detectives interviewed every lead. There was Harold Jenkins, the local handyman, who had been acting strangely that week, but nothing tied him to Emily directly. Then there was the shadow of a mysterious SUV that had been parked near the diner for days, disappearing after the disappearance. Witnesses recalled seeing someone inside, but no one got a clear look. Every possibility raised more questions than answers. Collins noticed a pattern in the testimonies. People who claimed to be witnesses often contradicted themselves, and some conveniently remembered details only after hearing others speak. In Alberta, where everyone knew everyone, the tension was thick. Families stopped talking, neighbors avoided each other, and fear replaced trust. By the end of the first week, frustration set in. There were no arrests, no definitive clues. Emily's family felt helpless. The community grew restless, angry, and anxious. Flyers faded into lampposts and doors. Snow covered over the faint evidence in the woods, and time began to stretch unbearably. Yet, amid all this, Detective Collins refused to give up. Every minor inconsistency, every conflicting testimony, every frozen trail mattered. She knew that in a town like Alberta, the truth wasn't always in plain sight. It hid in the pauses, in the subtle gestures, in the things people didn't say. And as the investigation unfolded, one fact became clear. Someone in Alberta knew more than they were letting on. The silence wasn't empty. It was loaded with intent, with secrets, with guilt. And in small towns, secrets don't stay buried forever. Especially when the snow melts and the cold fades, revealing what's been hidden all along. Because while the towns searched the woods, the streets, and the frozen fields, the real story was quietly building behind closed doors. One lie, one betrayal, one overlooked detail, any of them could lead to Emily. And for Alberta, that realization was the beginning of a long, dark reckoning. Days turned into a tense blur. Alberta's streets, once familiar and safe, felt like a maze of suspicion. The community was restless, whispers turning into accusations, and every friendly nod between neighbors now carried the weight of uncertainty. Detective Sarah Collins knew that to solve Emily Turner's disappearance, she needed to look beyond the obvious, past the familiar faces, and into the quiet corners where secrets festered. It was a routine visit to Cedarwood Lane that changed everything. Collins knocked on doors, interviewed neighbors, and retraced Emily's steps, hoping someone, anyone, had noticed something. That's when she met Mrs. Ruth Hargrove, an elderly widow who had lived on the lane for over 40 years. Ruth was the type of neighbor everyone trusted, the one who baked pies and watched over children. But that morning, Ruth's demeanor seemed off, her hands fidgeting, eyes darting. She insisted she hadn't seen anything unusual that night, but Collins sensed a hesitation, a pause that didn't belong in her story. Then came the breakthrough. A forgotten security camera. Ruth mentioned she had an old surveillance camera set up for her driveway, mostly for mail thefts in winter. She hadn't checked it in months, she said, and it hadn't recorded anything important. Reluctantly, she agreed to let detectives review the footage. The video was grainy, but it revealed something chilling. Around 10 p.m., Emily Turner appeared walking toward the lane, scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. At first, it seemed ordinary, but a few seconds later, a shadow detached itself from the edge of the trees. A man, tall, familiar, moving deliberately toward her. He wasn't masked, wasn't running, just approaching as if he had been waiting. Collins paused the footage, zoomed in, and her stomach sank. The man's features were recognizable to anyone in town. It was someone Emily had trusted, someone no one would have suspected. But why? And what had prompted him to follow her that night? The camera caught more. Emily's eyes widened. She turned, tried to speak. The man's expression didn't change. He reached for her hand, then, as if sensing movement behind the camera, glanced briefly at the lens before pulling her into the shadows. The frame went dark. Collins knew this was more than a random disappearance. It was calculated. It was personal. Someone in Alberta had been watching, planning, waiting for the right moment, and they had counted on everyone else being blind. Interviews with neighbors revealed small, unsettling details. Late-night visits to the diner by unknown people. Cars parked in odd places. Oddly timed phone calls. And Ruth, despite her initial hesitation, mentioned that she had once noticed Emily speaking to a man outside the diner who seemed overly familiar to insist. At the time, it hadn't seemed threatening, but now it fit into a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Detectives realized that what they had stumbled upon wasn't just evidence of her abduction. It was proof of something deeper. Someone in Emily's life was hiding a dark side, one that nobody had anticipated. The camera, forgotten and dismissed for months, had captured a moment that would unravel the town's sense of safety, exposing the hidden layers of betrayal lurking behind ordinary doors. For the Turners, the revelation was devastating. Every face they trusted became a question mark. Every casual interaction Emily had, every smile she gave, suddenly took on a new, sinister meaning. Collins warned them to stay cautious, but there was no turning back. The footage confirmed the worst fears. Emily's disappearance was deliberate, orchestrated by someone she knew, someone who blended seamlessly into Alberta's quiet streets. And as the investigation pressed forward, Collins understood one thing clearly. The answers weren't just hidden in the woods, or the snow, or the missing footsteps. They were in the choices, the secrets, and the lies of people around her. Albertus.com had been a mask, and the mask was cracking. Because sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't strangers from outside. They're the ones who live next door, smile at you over the fence, and seem harmless, until the night changes everything. The snow might cover footprints. The fog might hide shadows. But a forgotten camera doesn't lie. And now, Alberta was about to see the truth. A truth more shocking than anyone could have imagined. A truth more shocking than anyone could have imagined. By the time Detective Sarah Collins reached this stage of the investigation, Alberta was a town divided. Everyone had a theory about what happened to Emily Turner, and each theory seemed more plausible and more terrifying than the last. Friends, neighbors, even strangers from nearby towns, all tried to fill in the gaps with their own version of events. But Collins knew better. Only the facts mattered, and the facts were tangled, messy, and sometimes contradictory. The first reconstruction came from Emily's friends and family. They painted a familiar picture. Emily leaving the diner, walking toward her car, then vanishing into the cold night. According to this version, someone approached her near the lane, lured her toward the woods, and vanished before anyone could intervene. It was simple, terrifying, and easy for the public to digest. Flyers and news segments followed this narrative, keeping hope alive that she might still be found. The second reconstruction emerged from witness reports, people who claimed to have seen her in the hours after she disappeared. One woman said she saw Emily near the old quarry, talking to a tall man in a dark coat. Another claimed she ran past the gas station, looking frantic, then ducked into the shadows. These accounts conflicted with the first story, but they suggested she had been mobile, aware, and resisting, not taken immediately. If true, this meant Emily's last hours were filled with terror and courage. A young woman fighting against an unknown predator in the freezing Alberta night. The third reconstruction came from the police and forensic team, using snow patterns, tire tracks, and the recovered cell phone footage. They recreated a scenario that was chillingly deliberate. Emily had been followed, possibly stalked for days, by someone who knew the town, knew her routines, and waited until conditions were perfect. The snowstorm that night had conveniently erased many tracks, making it appear as though she had disappeared into thin air. But the phone, half buried near the roadside, indicated a struggle, a plea for help, and the presence of someone she had trusted, someone she might never have suspected. Collins realized the danger of these reconstructions. Each painted a different reality, and each fed the public SAE. People argued over which story was true. Local forums lit up with theories, ranging from innocent mistakes to sinister plots. Was it a crime of opportunity, or a carefully planned abduction? Was Emily alone when it started, or was someone manipulating her movements from the start? The detective knew one thing. In Alberta, the truth would never be simple. Stories in small towns often overlap, distort, and conceal. The first reconstruction offered closure, but lacked the full horror. The second added courage, but raised doubt. The third exposed planning, but was cold, almost too calculated to believe. And yet, every piece contained fragments of reality. The key was finding where those fragments intersected. Reconstructing Emily's last night wasn't just about solving a crime. It was about understanding her fear, her choices, and her instincts. It was about revealing the hidden networks of deceit within Alberta. The neighbors who watched too closely, the strangers who loitered, and the trusted faces that hid dark intentions. The town held its collective breath as Collins presented her findings. The three narratives, when combined, began to reveal a sequence. Emily leaving the diner, sensing someone behind her, attempting to flee, caught briefly near the roadside, and then taken by a figure known to her. Someone who used trust as a weapon. The reconstructions didn't answer every question, but they narrowed the possibilities, created a pattern, and exposed the chilling truth. This wasn't random. By the end of the day, Alberta understood that Emily's disappearance was a story of multiple layers, each one more haunting than the last. And the real question lingered in every household, every conversation, every anxious glance. down Cedarwood Lane. Out of these 3 nights, these 3 stories, which one, if any, was completely true? Because sometimes, the truth isn't a single line. It's a tangled web, a combination of events, secrets, and choices that finally converge into a moment that changes everything. And for Emily Turner, that moment had arrived on a cold, dark night in Alberta. A night that no one would ever forget. By the time Alberta had endured nearly a week of frozen fear, hope was fraying. Families whispered in hushed tones. Neighbors cast suspicious glances, and the local diner felt emptier than ever. Emily Turner's name was on everyone's lips, but the answers remained frustratingly out of reach. Detective Sarah Collins knew they needed something concrete, something that could cut through speculation, rumor, and fear. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. The forensic team had been running Emily's recovered items through the lab, analyzing the cell phone, her scarf, and even the soil found in her sketchbook. Each clue seemed small, almost insignificant, until one sample finally yielded results. A single DNA match, one traceable to someone Emily had known, someone no one had suspected until the lab confirmed it. Collins called in the team immediately. They reviewed the data, triple-checked every sequence. And still, the conclusion was undeniable. The DNA belonged to a man who had been part of Emily's life for years, someone who blended seamlessly into Alberta's quiet streets, someone whose presence had never raised alarms because he wore trust like a mask. The revelation sent shockwaves through the town. Families gathered in living rooms, staring at their televisions as reporters announced a major breakthrough. People whispered the names, recalled passing interactions, and wondered if they had missed something obvious. The reality hit harder than the freezing wind outside. Emily's abduction wasn't a random act. It was deliberate, carried out by someone who had watched, waited, and manipulated circumstances to perfection. Collins' team worked quickly. They cross-referenced the DNA with criminal records, school files, and even volunteer rosters. The suspect had no prior convictions for violent crime. That's what made him so dangerous. He had been living in plain sight, trusted by neighbors, welcomed into homes, and yet capable of something unthinkable. Interviews were reopened. Ryan Hulley, the ex-boyfriend, was cleared of suspicion. Friends and neighbors were questioned again, this time with new focus. Every interaction Emily had, every ride she took, every person she had confided in, was scrutinized. The DNA didn't just identify a suspect. It created a map of trust, betrayal, and opportunity. When Collins confronted the suspect, the man's calm facade cracked for the first time. The interviews revealed a calculated plan, a sequence of events meticulously crafted to avoid detection. The cold night, the snow, the abandoned quarry, all were tools in his orchestration. He had used familiarity to disarm Emily, a strategy that worked until the recovered items and DNA finally exposed the truth. Emily's family was notified immediately. Relief, anger, and disbelief washed over them in waves. The Turners had lived in fear and uncertainty for days, their home a fortress of anxiety. The DNA confirmation offered answers, but also reopened old wounds. The realization that someone they trusted, or at least knew well, had committed this crime. For Alberta, the revelation was monumental. The quiet town, which had prided itself on safety and familiarity, now faced an uncomfortable truth. Danger often lives where we least expect it. Faces we greet every day, voices we trust, can conceal intentions dark enough to change lives forever. The discovery also shifted the investigation's tone. With DNA evidence in hand, police could pursue warrants, track movements, and identify additional links that had previously remained hidden. Surveillance, witness accounts, and forensic analysis suddenly aligned into a coherent narrative. What had been chaotic and contradictory now began to make sense. And yet, even with clarity, emotions ran high. The town grappled with guilt, fear, and a lingering question. How many times had the suspect been close enough to act without detection? How many warnings had been missed? How many small signs ignored? Alberta learned that safety is often an illusion, maintained by vigilance and trust, and shattered when either is misplaced. Detective Collins knew there was still work to be done. DNA had revealed the who, but the how and the why required deeper exploration. Every lead, every clue, every moment of hesitation mattered. The coming days would uncover the full sequence of events, the manipulations, and the hidden acts that had led to Emily's disappearance. But for the first time, Opie returned, because while the snow had hidden footsteps, and fear had hidden intentions, DNA had frozen the truth in place. The threads of deception were finally visible, and Alberta would never look at its neighbors the same way again. The night Emily disappeared had been dark and silent, but now, with one sample of DNA, the silence was broken, and justice was closer than it had ever been. It had been for long years since Emily Turner vanished into the freezing Alberta night. 4 years of unanswered questions, of cold searches that led nowhere, and of a community haunted by the memory of a young woman who disappeared from their midst. The snow had melted, seasons had passed, but the mystery lingered like a shadow over every street, every home, every familiar face in the town. The breakthrough had come gradually. Detective Sarah Collins had pieced together the forensic evidence, reconciled conflicting witness accounts, and retraced Emily's steps. But the key was the DNA recovered from the phone and scarf, proof that someone Emily knew had orchestrated her disappearance. Yet, even with this knowledge, the identity of the perpetrator had remained a puzzle. Then came the day no one in Alberta expected. The police received a tip from a former neighbor who had relocated after Daniel Cray. The man, previously suspected of minor harassment but never criminally charged, had returned to town briefly. He was working odd jobs, helping local residents, and appearing to be a model citizen. Nothing about his demeanor suggested guilt, and yet Collins had learned that appearances can be deceiving. Officers surveilled him quietly for days. Every movement was catalogued, every contact analyzed. And then, on a cold November evening, the moment came. Daniel Cray was apprehended outside a local cafe where he was chatting amiably with another resident. People passing by recognized him, waved, and smiled. No one suspected the truth. No one imagined that the calm, smiling man could be the one behind Alberta's most haunting cold case. The arrest sent shockwaves through the town. News crews flooded the streets. Families whispered in disbelief, and the Turners, Emily's parents, were rushed to the station to confront the man who had held their daughter's fate in his hands. Mark Turner's hands trembled. Linda Turner's eyes welled with tears, and yet there was relief, the knowledge that justice had finally arrived. Collins oversaw the initial questioning. Cray's demeanor remained composed, almost eerily calm, as officers read him his rights. But under the weight of mounting evidence, surveillance footage, witness testimony, and, most damningly, the DNA, his carefully constructed facade began to crack. Questions about that night, about the planning, about the moments leading to Emily's disappearance, were relentless. And for the first time, cracks appeared. Emily's friends, Chloe Watson and others, had followed the story closely. They arrived at the station, holding on to hope, but bracing for disappointment. The confirmation of Cray's arrest felt surreal. The man they had passed on the street, smiled at during community events, and perhaps even trusted, was now unmasked. It was a jarring reminder that danger often hides behind ordinary faces. The evidence presented to the public detailed Cray's actions. He had monitored Emily's routines, learned the quiet rhythms of Alberta, and exploited the town's trust to isolate her. He had planned the disappearance meticulously, relying on the snowstorm to erase tracks and the community's perception of safety to shield himself. Every piece of evidence, the sketchbook, the phone, the scarf confirmed his calculated approach. For the Turners, the arrest was bittersweet. Relief came hand in hand with grief, as memories of the long months without Emily resurfaced. Every holiday she had missed, every birthday, every fleeting hope that she might return, collided with the reality that their lives had been shaped by fear and uncertainty. Yet, seeing the man responsible finally behind bars offered a form of closure they had almost stopped believing possible. The town's reaction was intense. Alberta had lived in quiet terror, and now the truth was undeniable. People walked the streets more cautiously, yes, but also with a renewed sense of vigilance. Community meetings were held, schools and workplaces reviewed safety protocols, and neighbors checked in on one another. The arrest had not only solved a cold case, It had reminded the town of its vulnerability and the importance of paying attention to the subtle signs around them. The legal process would take time. Cray faced multiple charges: kidnapping, assault, and obstruction of justice, with more possibly added as the investigation continued. Collins and her team worked tirelessly to ensure that every detail was documented, every piece of evidence accounted for, so that the case against him would hold in court. Yet even with the arrest, questions lingered. Alberta had been forever changed by Emily Turner's disappearance. The calm streets no longer felt entirely safe. The familiar faces carried an undercurrent of suspicion, and the story of one young woman's abduction had left an indelible mark on the community's collective memory. For Emily's family, the arrest was a beginning, not an end. It was the start of healing, the start of justice, and the start of reclaiming a sense of security stolen from them on that frozen January night in 2021. But it was also a reminder of the fragility of trust, the importance of vigilance, and the dark realities that can hide in even the smallest towns. As Daniel Cray was led away in handcuffs, Alberta watched, stunned but resolute. The town would rebuild, but the memory of Emily Turner, the fear, the unanswered questions, and the revelation that danger had lived next door would linger. The case that froze a community's heart had finally found its turning point. But this story of fear, courage, betrayal, and survival would continue to echo in Alberta for years to come. A chilling reminder that sometimes the most shocking truths are the ones hiding in plain sight. The arrest of Daniel Cray brought a measure of relief to Alberta, but the town remained forever altered. 4 years of uncertainty, fear, and speculation had left invisible scars. Families walked a little slower, neighbors observed each other with newfound caution, and the snow that once seemed like a simple part of life now carried memories of that fateful night in January 2021.4. Emily Turner's parents, Mark and Linda. The arrest offered closure, but it was not a neat ending. The long wait, the anxiety, and the unrelenting worry had carved deep lines into their lives. Yet amidst the pain, there was gratitude. Gratitude that justice had finally arrived, that the person responsible was held accountable, and that the nightmare that had haunted their family was no longer suspended in uncertainty. Detective Sarah Collins reflected on the case with a mixture of relief and lingering unease. It had been one of the most complex investigations of her career, not because of technical difficulty, but because the danger had existed in plain sight. Emily's disappearance exposed the truth that many small towns avoid acknowledging. Familiarity can be deceiving, and the people we trust the most can harbor secrets dark enough to destroy lives. In the months following the arrest, Alberta slowly began to heal. Community meetings focused on safety. Parents became more vigilant about their children's routines, and neighbors checked in on each other more regularly. The small town realized that, while trust is vital for a close-knit community, awareness and caution are equally important. Lessons were learned, painful as they were. Emily's friends returned to their routines, carrying the emotional weight of a disappearance and the knowledge that she had faced terror from someone she trusted. They organized support groups, art workshops, and memorial events in her honor. In doing so, they transformed fear into action, turning tragedy into a force that could strengthen the bonds of community. The case also reminded Alberta of the power of perseverance. Detective Collins and her team had meticulously pieced together seemingly insignificant details. Footprints, a forgotten camera, a phone half buried in snow. Each piece of evidence, each lead, and each tip contributed to the breakthrough. It was a testament to careful, patient investigation and the importance of never dismissing even the smallest clue. For the town at large, Emily Turner became more than a missing person. She became a symbol. Her story illustrated both the fragility and resilience of community, the dangers lurking behind familiar faces, and the strength found when people refused to ignore injustice. Residents spoke openly about vigilance, empathy, and the importance of listening to instincts. Lessons hard-earned, but now etched into Alberta's collective memory. As the legal proceedings against Daniel Cray unfolded, Alberta grappled with the balance between closure and remembrance. While justice was being served, memories remained vivid. Parents reminded children to stay aware, Friends shared stories of Emily's kindness and courage, and neighbors forged stronger connections, determined to never let fear fester in silence again. The arrest also left lingering questions, as any unresolved trauma does. Could more have been done to prevent the disappearance? Were there signs the town overlooked? While Collins had cracked the case, the reflection was necessary. Not for blame, but for growth. Alberta understood that safety is an active practice, built from attentiveness, courage, and community solidarity. Emily's story, finally unfolding fully after years of uncertainty, became a narrative of hope tempered by caution. It showed that even in small towns, where life seems simple and predictable, darkness can exist. But it also showed that vigilance, persistence, and courage from family, friends, and investigators can bring truth to light, even after years of silence. For viewers following this story, the takeaway is clear. The real world mirrors the tension in unsolved mysteries. The people we trust, the routines we follow, and the communities we build are all interconnected. Danger can appear in unexpected places, but so can resilience and justice. Understanding that duality, fear, and courage, threat and protection is essential for navigating life with awareness. As Alberta continues to heal, Emily Turner's legacy grows. Through memorials, community programs, and the collective memory of the town, she remains present, a reminder of courage, of vulnerability, and of the importance of never turning a blind eye to warning signs. Detective Collins, reflecting on the case, often said that it wasn't just about catching the perpetrator. It was about restoring trust, educating the town, and creating a framework where such a tragedy could never repeat. Her work ensured that Alberta would remember not only Emily's disappearance but also the lessons embedded in her story. And while the cold night that took Emily away in 2021 will never be forgotten, the warmth of community vigilance, justice, and remembrance slowly thaws the frozen fear that had gripped Alberta for so long. The story closes not with the ending of a single case, but with the enduring message that awareness, persistence, and courage can illuminate even the darkest nights. Alberta's residents continue to honor Emily's memory, share her story, and remain vigilant. Her disappearance may have started as a cold case, but the resolution proved that time, truth, and dedication can restore balance. The town remembers, learns, and carries forward, a reminder that even in the coldest moments, warmth can return, and justice, no matter how delayed, can prevail. Because in Alberta, the heart that once froze is learning to beat again, and Emily Turner's story, though born in tragedy, has become a guide for courage, resilience, and the enduring power of truth.